Hey everybody, I'm Steve Della, Croce, a registered dietitian. I've been a dietitian now over 14 years. My background is everything from starting in renal, working in dialysis units, to going out in the field for some pharmaceutical companies as a clinical specialist like Abbott. And I've had a private practice now for 12 or 13 of those years with some transition in between, but um, basically my background and my passion is not just nutrition, but in the business of nutrition. And
Yeah.
really, my goal is to help other dietitians help more people.
We're
That's
so
what it comes down
excited to have you on the live show today. I'm going to give a quick little background for those joining in who might be their first time joining for the RD to RD live show. And then we are going to talk a little bit more about Steve's background and dig into the topic of insurance reimbursement. So for those of you who have joined, if you've got specific questions, we're going to tackle a lot related to credentialing, billing, benefits eligibility, a little bit about state to state. Feel free to drop your questions. I'm going to keep an eye on those, and as we tackle some of these topics, I'll weave them in. So feel free, if we are talking about something and you want to ask a question, drop that in, and I'll be sure to stop Steve, and we'll dig into your question. So the live show again is every other week, and it's really been my passion to online. Sometimes we interact a lot, whether it's through Facebook or Instagram, but we don't get that kind of one-to-one interaction. And the live video allows us to kind of get a little bit more detailed about a topic and ask questions. So the live show is about really sharing our wisdom, and I'm happy to have Steve on today. So we were talking a little bit about your background and your love of business and helping other dietitians on the business angle. So how did you really fall into this? You had a private practice, but you really, I'm in a number of groups, and a lot of times your answers to insurance questions, I'm like, whoa, there's a lot that I don't understand. And how did this really find you? How did you become so passionate about, taking what you've learned and sharing it with other dietitians?
Yeah, and first of all, Megan, thank you for having me on. I think what you're doing is great with RD to RD, and I hope everyone gets to use those resources. So much of it just comes from experience, but everything at the end of the day does come back to, what my vision is, what is it that I wanted, so kind of attract what I wanted to learn, right? I knew back when I was in my internship at some point I'd probably have a private practice, but I wanted to grow it a little bit more. Again, my goal in life is just to help as many people as I can. So whatever way I did that, I was happy with it. And having a business beyond just me giving the one-on-one counseling was kind of my goal from day one. So it just meant that I had to learn as much as I could about running a business, about taking advantage of the fact that we're American and we have this opportunity to start a business, and we have tax write-offs and all these other benefits. It had nothing to do with nutrition, but it's something that I needed to at least have some basic knowledge of. And even coming back to actually starting working with a biller from the beginning who helped me credential. And I just paid attention to what they were doing and really what was needed, and just learned the process by watching what they did. And eventually I took over some of that on my own practice, and now I give those services out to other dietitians. So again, just comes from experience and from the passion behind the story.
Got it. I think I always love the stories of how people our careers as dietitians are rarely a straight line. And although I found that a lot of people know right away that whether they wanted to do a private practice or they wanted to run a business, that a lot of times that's something that they always knew that they wanted to do. And I always admire people like that, because I really saw myself in the corporate world for a long time, but I feel like I'm a little late to the party, and this was really the kind of people I should have been with the whole time. So I'm really enjoying learning from, kind of the passion of, my fellow dietitian entrepreneurs who've really been at this for a long time and have been driven to run a business from the beginning.
Hmm.
Yeah, so let's kind of start off with a 30 kind of high level view of what are the steps kind of in the process if you are a dietitian that takes insurance, or you want to in the future. It feels like eating an elephant. It's big. There's a lot of things. There's billers. What's the credentialing process? Let's just start from the big bucket. And what are the big tasks that you need to do if you're like, okay, I want to start accepting insurance?
Okay, so great question, and you have to start from the beginning, which is, what is your vision? And it doesn't mean you have to know everything about how your practice is going to look 10 or 20 years from now, but what is it that you want? If it's just you giving the counseling, great. Then you have an individual practice. Do you want to work 40 hours a week, or do you want to work 10 or 20 hours a week? And those little things will make a difference on how you decide to move forward. And that'll come up again in a minute when we get into some details. So knowing what your practice looks like, and that conversation also needs to include if you're a specialist or not. I'm a big believer in specialty. I think it really helps you not only niche out your clientele, but that helps your marketing, because you know who to focus on, who to go after. If you cast a wide net, it doesn't mean you're going to get a whole lot more business. I know in the beginning, when you're starting a practice, you probably think, well, let me just see whoever I can. I mean, I was trained in a little everything in my internship in my undergrad, so let me go for it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you do ultimately want to be the expert in something. And you should eventually kind of niche that out and figure out what your specialty is. That also helps you decide on what your practice looks like, what your business model looks like, and whether or not you should even take insurance, or which insurance companies you should accept. So that's the conversation you need to start having first. And obviously, I recommend working with a business coach. There are free mentors through A&D as well who have been in private practice. Take advantage of them. Help them. Let them help you figure out how you want this to look. And then you can go with the next step. So let's assume you've gotten to the point where you said, okay, my clientele is of the age group where they have insurance. Maybe they're Medicare age 65 and older. Maybe they're not. Again, that's a separate issue.
And also what state you're in, right? Because it varies, insurance.
It could vary. It's gotten a lot better in the last 10 years or so as far as insurance is being covered more and more. And more so even than state by state is plan by plan, because you could take in United Healthcare, for instance, which is the biggest insurance, but every patient might have a different carve out within that insurance plan. So, and we're definitely going to have a nice conversation about insurance verification, which we'll come back to that.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, that's definitely one to come back to. But the patients will dictate whether or not you should take insurance. So if your clientele is going to come to you for services that aren't covered by insurance, don't take insurance. When we'll talk about out-of-network benefits. But if you're going to cover issues, for instance, and I don't mean you should copy what I do. My private practice is renal and diabetes. That's my specialty. That's what I've done from day one. That's what I'm good at. So insurance covers that 90% of the time, including Medicare, especially Medicare. It's the only thing Medicare covers.
Right.
So clearly, I'm in network with Medicare. I'm in network with about 10 other local or national plans that make sense for my practice. There's a few that I'm not in network with because it doesn't make sense. They won't pay me. So the patient's just going to have to be responsible for that. So again, let's assume you're going to see a clientele that the diagnoses are mostly going to be covered. Obesity is much more covered. In fact, it's a preventative benefit. Many of the insurance plans are covering it with no copay.
Yes, the preventative care benefit is so glorious if you can have access to it.
Yeah, and some plans will pay for obesity as a preventative plan, and then they will, in other plans, say no, it's not preventative. It's a diagnosis. It's a medical diagnosis, so we're going to charge a patient a copay. At the end of the day, you're getting paid, so that's the important thing. It's covered.
Right.
So once you figure that out, you decide if you want to be in network. Then at that point, you need to do a few things. You need to go out and get an NPI number, National Provider Enumerator. That's basically like a Social Security number. In fact, it's the same length of numbers, and it's going to be with you for the rest of your life. So if I could share the website real quickly, I'll show you what it looks like. Let me know when I can do a screen share.
Yeah, go for it.
There are two different types of NPI numbers, and this is where a lot of people get really confused, but it does come back to the conversation of, am I going to be an insurance provider or not, right? So this is the website up here where you want to go. It's free. It takes a few minutes. It's not hard to do. You have to just make sure that you have your CDR number and you're up to date. If you are licensed in your state, you want to know what your license number is. If you're certified in your state, that certification number will apply as well. So whichever it is, just make sure you have those in place. So get your CDN or license if you haven't already. Okay, so insurance companies will not pay you if you don't have one or both of those.
I
That's important.
know a lot of people have had an NPI perhaps from an
Hmm.
employer. I did,
Yes.
but when I went
Hmm.
to a private practice environment, I had to change some information in this. Maybe you
Very
can
good
speak to
question.
that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, so the number is yours. That's associated with you forever, but your address could change. So, and I know a lot of doctors who moved around that don't update their MPI address, so it is what it is. The truth is that it's still you, and it's just proving that you are licensed. So go ahead and get that number. An individual number means that you can provide individual services. You are the rendering provider. A group number is literally that. It's a number that's associated with a group. Now, we probably need another day for a discussion for being in business and how your corporate structure is set up.
Yeah.
But regardless, if you have a vision of having a practice with more than one person in the practice, whether it's you and one other person or you stepping aside and the other people do all the practicing, you can get a group number and then everyone else's individual number gets associated underneath it, almost like an umbrella.
I
And
see.
plus, you'll have a tax ID. That tax ID will be associated with the group number, and then you could associate your individual MPI number as well with that tax ID and group. So
Okay.
it's always thinking of an organization. Up top is the tax ID group number for MPI, and then each individual is almost like an employee underneath it. And this is the way that insurance companies think. They're very structured, and they need to have certain things in a line. Again, you can be just an individual MPI and just
Right.
provide services and just do everything through that one number. That's totally fine.
So this
But
is for your type 1 NPI, the number that follows you around for forever. And then the group one, is that the more type 2 NPI? Is that what we
correct.
were kind of
Yes,
transitioning into? Okay.
that's group two, type two, and you're not going to provide services individually under that number. Make sure if you get a type two, you always have to have both.
Right. Okay.
All right. So this is the site you go. Again, it's free. It's easy. Get
Okay.
that done and just get it out of the way.
Good. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure. Now the other issue that comes up is,
Do you want to keep sharing this or you want to go back to?
yeah, while I'm on here, let
Okay.
me go through a couple of the sites. Now you have to get vetted out. The insurance companies won't credential you unless they know that you're legitimate. So a lot of times you have to go through a vetting process. There are a few companies that do this. The main one is called CAQH.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what everyone gets confused by. Well, what do I do there? In other words, you can't get on a panel without being vetted out here. This is a profile that you're going to create associated with your MPI, your tax ID, your social security number. Your license is going to be here. Make sure you have professional liability insurance because they'll ask for that here. And once you're in the system and accepted, then you can move forward and get credentialed with the individual commercial insurances like United Healthcare and Aetna, Blue Cross, all those commercial plans. They're going to want to check you out here. I'm just going to mention that in certain parts of the country, CAQH doesn't apply. So there's a couple of other ones. I think Noridian is one. ASH is another one. So it just depends on the insurance company which one they want you to go through. And you'll find that out as you try to apply. But bottom line is have all your ducks in a row, have all your information, keep it very organized, know your numbers, your MPI, tax ID, all that fun stuff. And it'll be easy to do these applications. They're not all that hard to do. They're a little time consuming, but they're the same information repeated over and over again. So just make sure you have it all in place.
Got it.
The next step is how to pick your insurance companies. That's a tough one. So I always start with Medicare. And like I said before, Medicare is only going to pay for CKD and diabetes. They might pay for prediabetes next year. Every time the government says they're going to do something, just add an extra year to whenever it's going to actually go live. But there's a good chance they'll pay for prediabetes. But that's it. So if your patients are younger than 65 or don't have those issues and you're not addressing those issues, just don't go and network with Medicare. It's that simple. It's just not worth your time because they're not going to pay for your services. And you could always bill them out of network.
Got it. I'm going to switch you back to side by side, you think? Or maybe if you just click stop sharing, it might be easier.
Yes.
Unless you want to go into more. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, it depends how granular we want to get. We can come back to that.
We can always
I don't want to make everyone's head spin right now.
But I think this is a good point that it's there is a lot of information to know. Insurance, I mean, even as a patient, it's confusing. So from the patient side, you had to learn a lot when you first got insurance, and if you had kids, and learning how to your own benefits. That from the provider side, it's as complex, or more so, that over time with practice it gets easier. So we talked a little bit about credentialing, and that's just the fancy word for becoming in network with a insurance provider. And that's where they basically go through and make sure that you are indeed have the credential and the skills, and they check everything to bring you into their panel, right?
Right.
And a panel is basically, the people who, within that insurer can see patients and bill, whether you're a different. And sometimes panels are full, right? From what I understand, sometimes you have a difficult time. Maybe you meet all the requirements, you're just not accepting. What happens in that case?
Right. You don't have much choice, and this comes back to the fact that insurance companies just are arbitrary in how they do things. They make their own rules. So if they decide that there's no room on their panel, they're not accepting anyone else, you can appeal the request, and you could suggest that there is a need in your geography, and especially if you have a specialty, to be added to the panel. So every once in a while, they'll take a closer look and say, okay, well, in this geography, we have X amount of dietitians on our panel, and we have this amount of patients who are clients of our insurance company. Okay, maybe we will give you a second consideration and add you on.
Okay.
That's best case scenario. If worse, you're out of network, and you could still often bill the patient's insurance out of network. And if you want to have the whole super bill conversation, we can do that.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that out of network, but you were starting to touch on the topic of how to choose what insurance companies to apply. I don't know if we got quite through all you wanted to share there.
Yeah, no. So that's it can be difficult because it's who's out there, which companies are really covered, and you kind of get an idea based on what insurance you have, what insurance the people in your area have. If you have relationships with doctors, ask them which insurance they are typically seeing, because hopefully there'll be a referral source to you, and you want to line up. That doesn't always work. If for instance in New York, Medicaid does not pay for nutrition services anymore. They actually just changed the law last year, unfortunately. And a lot of people have these commercial managed Medicaid plans, so we can't take it. I can't know much I could do there, right? But if we know which plans most people have, if you know which plans typically pay for nutrition benefit services, which is much, much more now than it ever was, and almost everyone has some coverage for it now. Those are good starting points. So you need to find out. Now, how do you find that out? I would definitely reach out to the state or your local A&D chapter, because there's always a reimbursement chair on that board. So if you're an A&D member, you have free access to someone who's very up to date on state reimbursement issues.
I actually didn't know that. That's really. I'm an A&D member. I did a Google search and found, a few established dietitians, and I just boldly said, hey, would you mind? The worst thing they could do is say no. Can I come in and talk about, I just moved here, and in general, dietitians were just very nice people. And they really told me these insurers reimburse well, these ones don't. I mean, we didn't talk contracted rates or anything you're not supposed to talk about, but just kind of that general lay of the land was really helpful.
Absolutely. I strongly suggest doing that. That was my step 2. Absolutely. Because there's no competition. There's plenty of patients who need our services. So there's no reason why somebody should say, no, not going to tell you. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So that was beneficial, but I definitely will make note of that reimbursement chair for my state. And the Academy has a lot of great tools around, the MNT provider newsletter they send out, that's intended to help us. So.
Right. And I
Okay.
know not everyone's a fan,
I
but
know.
they're out there, and you can still find out who's on the board and just reach out to that person.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be a member, but just pointing out what resources are out there.
That's right.
So you started to touch on different insurer types. So you mentioned, there are different insurance types. You've talked about Medicare, you've talked about some commercial, and then you talked about Medicaid, but those are through the commercial insurers. So it can get a little confusing when we start talking about different types of insurance and then kind of segueing into the whole benefits checking. Let's just start out by first saying, what are the different types of insurance? And then that kind of helps you on that benefits eligibility part.
Sure. So for government, there's Medicare. It's national, right? That's a national, and it's from 65 years or older, or if they have a disability, sometimes they get Medicare primary. Then they also typically get a secondary plan, which just confuses everyone even more. But really focus on the primary. That's typically almost always how you're getting paid.
Like the Medicare Advantage programs, right?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
My parents are Medicare age, so I've had these conversations.
Right, I'm sure they're just as confused as us.
Yes.
So there's Medicare, it's government. Then there's a couple of other government, like, if somebody has a VA benefit because they were a veteran, or TRICARE is another
Right.
veterans plan. So just be aware of those. Certain geographies are very prominent with those more than others. Then there's the state Medicaid. So Medicaid is a
State
state-run
administered.
program, right? They fund that based on money from the taxes of that state. So you can be possibly a provider for a state Medicaid plan, just straight Medicaid, or in addition to that, each commercial plan, which we'll talk about, can offer a managed Medicaid plan as well. So again, I mentioned Fidelis, Health First. These are some types of plans that you may see in different parts of the country that are a commercial plan, and they may even have commercial insurance. But then on top of that, they offer a carve out of a state Medicaid funded plan, and it's just their discretion how they use the funds. So they may pay for nutrition benefits, or they may not.
Yeah, the Medicaid gets complicated because it's state by state.
It is.
And then the carve outs, and that gets even, and then they change. Like New York just changed. So
yes, not fun.
No, not fun.
Now that brings up the conversation of reimbursement rates, because Medicaids tend to be less,
right.
And then each commercial plan is totally arbitrary as well. I find that Medicare is one of the highest because all the other insurances base their rates on Medicare, a percentage of Medicare. In some places, that's not the case, and the commercial plans pay more. It's really, again, arbitrary. So you need to reach out to each individual insurance that you know is in your area, and you can request a fee schedule. A lot of times it's on their website. It's all based on doctors, and you have to ask for certain codes. And a lot of times they won't give it to you unless you're applying for a contract. So again, they just like to make their own rules. You have to kind of be patient and wade through that process. But I should mention, by the way, Medicare process for application is 3 months, almost to the day. That's exactly how long every application takes. It's uncanny. The other commercial plans tend to be about 6 weeks, give or take. So knowing that in the back of your mind, get the process started, get all your info together, start by requesting fee schedules, finding out who's open, which networks are open, and then go after, there's maybe United Healthcare, maybe it's Aetna and Cigna, maybe it's the Blue Cross. Blue Cross has a state plan which within every area, but you have to at least get a network with that local state plan. And then there's plenty of other companies too.
So do you recommend, let's say your big goal, you're in network with 10, like you are personally, plus maybe some more, that to say, maybe I should start with, a handful, or do you say just try to manage 10 at a time? I know for me personally, I did 3 and I felt like, whew, that's a lot right now. Do you think it's better to just do them all or do a few? Any thoughts on that?
It depends what you can handle, of course, because I think many of you right now are probably working a job, maybe even have a family at home, and then you're trying to bootstrap this new business on the side, and how much can you really handle? How much headspace do you really have? So that's a good answer to that question, right? How much can you handle? And if 3 is a good number for you, start with 3. That's fine. I will say the applications are almost identical from one company to another. So maybe you just want to knock them all out. That's up to you. Because, you don't want to cut yourself off and say, well, I could have seen that patient if I took that insurance, but I didn't apply. Not that that's always going to happen, because again, it comes back to where your referrals coming from and your marketing and how are you getting these patients,
Before we go to, for full disclosure, before we move on to checking benefits, I outsource the process of credentialing. Like you said, I was, 2 kids. I was like, it's something I want to tackle. So I hired someone to take care of that profile you were talking about and apply with the insurance companies I had chosen. And literally the only thing I did was like sign the contract and scan a few documents. It was even flagged like sign here. It was the easiest thing I ever did. So I really don't have a lot of experience directly going through this process. And I'm actually really honestly glad that I don't. It seems hard, but I know a lot of dietitians that muddle through and they're like, it wasn't that bad after all. So I think there's that, like outsourcing it, that you don't have to do it. You can hire somebody else to do credentialing for you if you don't want to manage it yourself.
Right. It comes down to what you want. And I have clients who call me all the time asking if I can credential for them. I never want to credential every insurance company they want, because I don't think they should pay for every single contract, basically. That's typically how you get charged. But I like to hold their hand and do 1 or 2 with them and then tell them go and do the rest, because you've done most of the work already. It's just rinse and repeat. So, you could spend a lot of money, and it's an investment in a way, right? Because you're going to get paid ultimately.
Right.
So, when you're starting a business, you have to invest some money, no matter which way you look at it. That could be one area where you do. But again, like you said, most dietitians figure out it's actually not that hard to do.
Right.
It's just how much patience you have, how good are you with paperwork, and follow up. That's the key, is follow up.
Got it. That's a good point. So let's kind of say, well, we decided, yes, our business model includes taking insurance. We researched all of the various insurance plans in our state. We maybe talked to a couple of local dietitians. We applied, we got in network. Now we have clients calling and we are like, how do I make sure that this, I want to have this conversation, say, yes, it's likely covered. How do you do that process? What does that look like from an operational standpoint? And then what do you actually do when you call the insurance company?
Yeah, it's what do you want to find out, right? So you need to know that the patient has nutrition benefits. There are a handful of procedure codes that we use. So that's the good part about billing. When you're in a medical office, there's literally over 10,000 codes that they can potentially use. And for us, there's maybe 4. I mean, it's just that simple. Depending on what your practice, maybe a couple of others. But there are actually 2 that we use almost all the time, and then a handful of others if you're a diabetes specialist.
Right.
So the good thing is you can call, you say, okay, this is my procedure code. It's a CPT code. If you're writing this down, it's 97802 is your initial visit, 97803. Right, 97802, 97803.
Yep.
3 is the follow-up. So you're pretty much giving them that code, and they may or may not ask you for a diagnosis. Some insurance companies will not go through checking diagnosis. We actually prefer that they do, because we want to know, well, does this one have a copay? Does this one not have a copay? Will this diagnosis get paid? Will this not? For the most part, they're making a decision based on the procedure. So if the patient's benefits pay for that procedure, you should be okay for the most part. Okay. So you want to start with that. You want to ask them how much is that copay, which they'll usually tell you. You want to ask if the patient has preventative benefits, and then see if there is coverage. And it might be confusing, because for the same procedure code, there may be no copay if you use a different diagnosis.
Right, the diagnosis code that's associated with preventative care. Yeah.
Right, and that's up to the insurance company.
And it's not the same for different insurance companies. They use their own little code. Yes, I know.
Yep. So in other words, obesity, E66.9 might be considered preventative, whereas overweight, 66.3, might be considered medical. And that medical code has a copay associated, preventive code didn't. Or it might be vice versa. Or it might be something. I've had insurance companies tell us that they will only pay for nutrition services if the patient has a coronary artery disease risk. didn't tell us which diagnosis applies towards that. You would think hyperlipidemia, maybe hypertension. You would think diabetes and obesity as well, but they won't say.
So if
So
you're just starting out, and I did this quite a bit, and calling, and they won't tell you the ICD-10 code. They won't tell you the diagnosis code, that it's kind of nebulous. So you are going to go ahead and say, well, that CPT code, 97802, an initial nutrition visit, they say there's coverage, that in general, if you get an answer to yes, you can, but you don't necessarily know the diagnosis code. Would you proceed with, I mean, I usually tell the client, as with anything, can't guarantee coverage, but your insurance for the type of visit we're having is covered.
Right. Yeah, for the most part, that's going to be fine. And you, at worst case scenario, you charge the specialist copay that's on their insurance card. And if you at the end of every claim that you submit, you'll get a reply that's called an explanation of benefits. Maybe the bill was paid, maybe it wasn't paid, but it'll always say what the patient's responsibility is. So perhaps you collected the right copay. If not, you just refund the patient. But it's better to collect it up front and not be out that money, and then just refund them if necessary. So, I mean, hopefully you get a clear answer that certain procedure code, certain diagnosis code, you'll collect this copay. And also, this is the important thing. This is why calling is so important, because the only way to find out how many visits they're allowed is to ask a live person. It's very frustrating because a lot of the other information we could find out online, but you have to speak to somebody. So in other words, they come in for 97802, you bill them, you collect the copay, and now how many times can you see them again? It may be very different.
Yeah, it may be as many as you want, or there may be a no limit, or there may be 6.
Maybe
especially
6 and maybe 1.
If it's an HMO plan versus like a PPO plan, might be different.
That's correct. So that's a good difference as well. So yeah, that's why you have to call. Sometimes the patient doesn't even know they have an HMO, which is a closed network.
And those kind of patients, I've really dealt mostly with the PPO side, but they're going to need a referral from their physician, absolutely, for sure.
Often, yes. So then that's another phone call. You have to call the physician and get them to put it in the system as a referral. Which case, as long as you're in their panel, you'll show up. It's a click of a button for them to do it. You just want to make sure you get a confirmation that it's in before you see the patient and not get paid.
Okay, the physician's within the same panel, so there's something they click. It isn't like the actual old school referral form. Is that?
In the, let's say the HMO's electronic system, the portal, they'll log in and create a referral and put it in, and your name will come up under your tax ID and MPI. They'll click it, say referral for nutrition services. They'll put in a diagnosis code typically and submit it. It's approved. Now you can see the patient. They could even choose how many visits you're allowed to see them for. So that's the advantage. Once you're in network, you can do that. If the patient has an HMO and you're out of network, you cannot bill their insurance. It will not pay you.
So while we're on this topic, let's talk a little bit about out of network, because we talked a little about getting in panels. Sure. So you get someone, and this happens to me because I'm a pediatric dietitian in a suburban area, and I focus on, they want to see me, and they're like, well, I'll just pay for it. And I'm like, I don't know how to really do that. So how do you bill out of network? And what are the pros and cons? Like, what should you be watching out for? So
firstly, you're saying you're not in network for that insurance company. Okay, because if you are in network, you cannot take cash for the visit. Just everyone understand that.
Okay.
You're under contract. Okay, so
it's a United, and I don't take United, or Cigna, and I don't take Cigna.
Right. So first of all, I want everyone to understand that if you find out the patient has out-of-network benefits, you can bill their insurance and get paid. And whatever difference between what they pay and what you charge, the patient will be responsible, whether it's out of their deductible or copay or above that, you can charge.
So out-of-network benefits, when you go in and you, like the benefits eligibility, there's usually 2 columns, right? Here's what your in-network, here's what your out-of-network benefit is. Okay.
Right. We do call for that because you want to make sure they have out-of-network benefits for nutrition. So typically, again, at this point, for the most part, they do. That's usually not an issue. But you do need to know that some PPO commercial insurances, that patient's plan does not have out-of-network benefits
For nutrition.
at all.
Oh.
But possibly just for nutrition. There are a lot of carve-outs when it comes to that. So it's a cost savings by their employer. So sometimes it's still worth the verification phone call. Now, you can pass that off to the patient. You're risking whether they do it before they come in, and very often they don't, because they don't understand insurance any more than you do, and it's confusing. All right, but anyway, I brought up the fact that you can bill their insurance once they know that you exist. In other words, you bill once and you get into their system with your MPI, you can bill them out of network. I know lots of doctors and dietitians and chiropractors and acupuncturists who just stay out of network completely because they want to control their fee schedule. So it's not a bad option, but the patient doesn't understand insurance. So this is just my take on it. You can give them what's called a super bill. In almost every EMR, there's an option to create a super bill with all the same information as if you created what's called a 1500 form, which we do to submit to insurance. Okay, the patient's ID number, the date of birth, your ID numbers, and all that. You give it to the patient, and it's on them. They have to submit it to the insurance company and hopefully get reimbursed. You're already creating a form in your EMR. To submit it to an insurance company is almost a click of a button at this point. It's a service that you can provide to your patients, especially if they're going to be paying you for the difference. So I'm not using the numbers. I'm not saying what anybody's fee schedule is, right? But let's say you charge $100 for your visit. And the patient's insurance, even out of network, will pay $50. Maybe the patient has a copay of $20, so that's $30 that you're out. You could submit a bill to the patient and say, you owe me $30. That's my fee. I'm out of network. You have to pay me that. So you could still go ahead and do that, but meanwhile, that other $50 from the insurance company could have come directly to you or from them in a check. So there's lots of different ways to do it that just takes the work out of their hands. It just makes them want to come back to see you without the headache of billing their own insurance. So everyone's different.
I would love to have another little dig on out-of-network billing, because I think it's one of these things that I don't find good information on very often. And
Sure.
I think it is an opportunity, and certainly, one way to, if you're not taking all 10 insurance companies, if you're more savvy with that process, it could definitely expand, who you could take in your area while you evaluate who else you should apply to be in the panel for. It's a really good point. Okay. So I am being very cognizant of time because we've only started scratching, and I have so many more questions, but we have some questions from our viewers. So I want to make sure that I get to them. Thank you for your patience, as I've been very selfish asking my questions. So goodness gracious. So I will share the credentialing that I outsource to, but Steve, if you offer that service or have other recommendations, I can drop those in as comments as well. So Christy will get that to you. So Jesse wants to know, are nutritional services covered with an HSA through a commercial plan?
Great question. So health savings account, some people have flexible savings accounts. There's pre-tax money that they pay into. Absolutely. That in fact, they should be paying their copays with that. If they're paying for their entire visits or a package even, they can use all the funds in there. But quick caveat is, when you set up your merchant services or however you're going to collect payment, whether it's PayPal or what's the other, Square or Stripe. Stripe's very good, right? Make sure that you're set up as a healthcare provider, because the HSA will not go through like a regular credit card. You just have to be a certain provider. Once you've set that up, absolutely take that. In fact, I that's the first thing I tell people is when I'm out of network or something, I say, hey, do you have an HSA? Like, you already paid into it. Let's use those funds. And people are like, oh, I didn't know I could use that. So 100%, you are at the same level as a medical doctor as a healthcare provider. So you have all the same rights to that.
Okay. And that, you would just bill them through Stripe, and then they keep their receipts for their own purposes. I use one of those, the employer that we have, I use a high deductible plan with an HSA that I fund, up to the deductible each year. So I'm very familiar with, I pay out of pocket for everything that isn't preventative. I guess not out of pocket, but out of my pre-tax HSA account. So I think it's becoming a lot more common, and people, people that do it, it's not strange to them. It's very normal for me.
That's right.
Very normal for me. So another question here, will coverage for commercial plan vary from state to state? If I want to become a provider for Aetna, say, do I need to apply with Aetna in each state or just once? Really good question.
Great question. So we'll start at the end, and the answer is no. For a national company like Aetna, Cigna, United Healthcare, you're not doing it by state. It's a national plan, so it's one application and that's it. It is different with Blue Cross Blue Shield or Blue Cross or Anthem. There's all these different types of Blue Cross plans. That's state by state, and you're applying to your state. If real quick, if you live in Texas and the patient has insurance from Michigan because that's where their employer is, you're still submitting your insurance claim to Texas Blue Cross. So for the national plans, basically when you go on every insurance company's website, it'll take you through the process. It'll ask you what state you're in and it'll go from there. So it should be a little intuitive at that point.
Okay, that's a really good question. All right, yes, agreeing on more out-of-network billing information. So we got a confirmation here that people want to talk more about that. Okay. So we could dive into a lot more about eligibility, but let's say we now are kind of moving into the billing component and doing that well so that our claims don't get rejected. What are some of the issues with submitting claims and getting paid? Some things, headaches you can just save yourself by knowing out of the gate.
Sure. And I find that's just usually silly mistakes, things that we just forget to do. And again, I mentioned an EMR before. Make sure you're using an EMR at this point. There's no reason not to. Most of them, that dietitian-friendly EMRs out there, are like $27 a month. It's just nominal at this point. But they make your life so much easier because you're going to create a chart in the EMR that has all the patient's demographic info, correct name, full name,
insurance plan information, doctor's name, all the things you might need.
If you have a referral, it needs to go in the system, right? And the patient's insurance information has to be correct, right? So you make sure that it's the patient's correct name, make sure you have their ID number, make sure you know who the primary insured is. It might be the spouse or they might be a child, like in your practice, and you have to have the adults, the parent's name was on the plan. So all that information is necessary. The payer ID number is huge because if there are different plans with the same name, that you need to submit to the correct payer ID. And that's usually on the insurance card. So we always get a copy of the card, but it's not.
And send it to me so I have it. So I don't always have a photocopier handy.
Right. If that's your only option, definitely do that. Just make sure it's being transmitted, safely.
Yes,
and
it is secure.
Typically fine is the way to do it, right?
Yeah.
But if you're in an office, just make a copy of the front and back and note what the 5-digit payer ID is. So make sure that's on there because you don't actually have to have the address of the insurance company. You need to have the payer ID. That's
got it.
If you're submitting electronically.
So if we're talking about that submitting electronically hopefully we'll dig a little bit into using Office Ally. I've just been logging into the portals. I use so few insurance companies that I just log in and like in 2 minutes, my claim is submitted and boom, it's done for me. Right. But I know a lot of people use Office Ally, so I want to make sure we weave that in too.
Sure. Let's come back to that.
Okay.
So we'll just talk about the basics again. You have all that information. Now you have to just put in certain other codes like, okay, what's your procedure code? The CPT, again, 97802 or 3 typically. And then
I find like the different insurers cover maybe 4 units for an initial and some cover 5, making sure you have the right number of units.
Good point. We didn't talk about that. So a unit is typically 15 minutes. So some plans will say, well, the patient has 3 hours with you per year. 3 hours is 12 units. You have to just figure that out, okay? It's all so different.
It's in your contract or on the guidelines for each insurer.
As far as what a unit is?
Well, as far as how many are covered.
No, that's what the insurance verification call will tell you, because you
Mm,
just don't know until that point.
I see.
So, and just real quick, I did it myself in the beginning. I was making those phone calls. Then I hired out a diet tech who did those things and scheduling for me. So, and now she works for me almost full time in nutrition practice management, calling for other dietitians. It's such an important service that some dietitians just hire us to do that. But this is the only way we find out the number of visits allowed and number of units allowed is calling a live person. It's kind of crazy, but it's true. So now that you know how many units you saw them for, you're going to choose that, and then you'll add the diagnosis code. So make sure you have the procedure code, the units you saw them for. Make sure you have your diagnosis code. Um, Make sure you put in the charges. So whatever that hourly charge, or it's basically per unit. So whether it's $50 per unit or $20 per unit. It's up to you. Just make sure it's more than what the insurance company pays. Because in
Oh,
other words, if they pay you $100 an hour and you charge them 70, they're only paying you 70. So make sure you charge a little bit more, because every once in a while they do raise their rates
oh,
without even telling you, which is a nice surprise. But you want to make sure you capture enough, and you can't write off the difference of a loss or anything like that. But don't leave any money on the table. So
got
I
it.
always tell my clients charge more than what you think you should charge, and just make sure it's enough.
And if you're offering like a cash pay discount made for people who don't have insurance, how does that work? Because a lot of times you can just set your
Yeah,
prices at whatever you
prompt
want for
pay.
cash pay discount.
That's it. It's
Okay.
whatever you want. Yeah. So it has nothing to do with the insurance reimbursement rate.
Right. But whatever your billing rate is not necessarily
Mhm.
what you're getting reimbursed, but having an actual
Correct.
rates established for someone
Mhm.
who I was under the impression you had to have that, but I'm not sure I do have it established,
Yeah.
but
You should. I think it's just good practice to have a cash pay rate established, and whatever that would be. And then you can go from there for prompt pay discounts or sliding scale or what have you.
okay.
Definitely establish your cash rates.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so let me go back to the questions again. Well, we've talked a little bit because we're running out of time. I want to make sure people who did drop a question get it answered.
Sure, sure.
How does it work with, oh boy, the T word, telehealth?
Ah,
Can you bill patients out of the state where you practice? Oh my gosh, now we've really opened up a can of words on telehealth. That
yeah.
probably a whole new live interview with
You're
Steve.
not going to like my answer. It's just too gray right now. There's not enough clear guidelines. So if you're licensed in the state where the patient lives, then you're definitely good to go. And it used to be that telehealth was only covered for patients who lived in a rural area, but I'm seeing that it's being covered just across the board. It's very odd because the insurance companies will tell you to bill it as an office visit, and that's not appropriate. So I hesitate with that. And that's
Mm,
another section on the claim form is the location, like 11 being an office and 02 being telehealth.
mm.
I think you should be honest and accurate. It seems like they're taking a chance, but yeah, it's too gray. I just don't get into a licensure issue. If you're not licensed in the state where the patient lives, taking a little bit of a risk. Not that the people are running out suing dietitians, but be aware of it, and maybe put in your policies and procedures that you're not liable. Um, and then there's whether the insurance company will pay for it. And again, that does depend, and a verification call will help you figure that out.
Got it.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So we're running short on time, but I want to make sure we touched a little bit on the claims
Mhm.
process, and I think we could always drop some questions in afterwards if people have
Sure.
more. But before we let you go, I wanted to make sure that you, and your wisdom and experience, what other resources, we talked about a few, and tell us a little bit about the business that you have and what services you provide to dietitians that are trying to get into accepting insurance or just are looking for more support.
Sure. Yeah. So find out, how to submit claims through your insurance company. Like in each individual portal, it's free to do that. Using Office Ally might be a good resource because it's a clearinghouse. You could just batch all your claims and push one click of the button, and they'll do it for you. They're starting to charge for certain things though, so it might actually be cheaper to go the other route. Um, But Office Ally is a good resource because they will answer a lot of your questions. They have great customer service. So sometimes even as you're becoming a client, just going to their website, Office Ally, ALLY.com, is tons of resources, finding payer ID numbers and finding out, how do you get electronic data interchange? There's all these forms to fill out. They're great. So I definitely recommend them, and I do use them. I have for years. And we're trying to stay with them at this point with the whole clearinghouse issue. Again, the A&D is a great resource. The MNT toolkit is fantastic. They're always updating it. And to their credit, they just fought Aetna when Aetna was trying not to pay us for a preventative code. They fought them, and Aetna reversed their decision in like 2 months, which is so quick. So A&D is trying really hard to really help us. My company, obviously, I answer questions all the time, so I'll share my email address. Please send me a note, no problem. Find me on Facebook. I'm in the insurance, credentialing, and dietitians and private practice groups, and on LinkedIn. Connect with me. I'm happy to answer questions. There's a lot of things that you can do on your own. I just want you to get off on the right foot. And when you need services later, delegate it out, because that's where you're going to make the most use of your time. But feel free to get in touch with me. So those are some of the best resources. Definitely join the Facebook groups like insurance, credentialing, and information, the dietitians in private practice. If you're in the A&D, join some of these EMLs, the electronic mailing lists with like the nutrition entrepreneurs. It's a great private practice group. Tons of resources there, and everything's archived, so you could find lots of questions answered in both Facebook and on the email groups. So those are my first recommendations. They really work well without spending any money.
Yes, as when we're bootstrapping, if you're starting out. This was really helpful. So we'll put your email address in the comments so people can reach out to you if you don't mind. And then your website is Nutrition MGNT, which I included in the main comment. People want to check out what you have there. Steve, this has been so fantastic, and I won't put you on the spot here, but at some point maybe we could chat and talk about what we could do about out of network billing, because I think that's a topic that would be definitely of interest. So I'd like to see how to leverage your knowledge there.
Happy to help. Thanks for having me, by the way.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks for joining the RD to RD live show. Taking a little bit of break. I'll be at Fancy in a couple of weeks. If you're attending, come see me. I'll be at booth 3007 on the member marketplace on Monday. And when we come back in, what will that be? November, we're going to do some work on graphic design. I'm going to have Whitney Catalano come on. She just hit 10,000 on her Instagram following. I just watched her go from 2,000 to 10,000 in a matter of months, and I've just been shocked. But she's a graphic design wizard. So I'm going to have her on talking about everything from your website to product listing images, like how to think like a designer. So that'll be fun in November. And then we're also going to do Pinterest. I'm going to have Chrissy Carroll on. She's snacking and sneakers about how to use Pinterest to drive traffic to your website. So I'm very excited about what I've got coming up on deck. And again, thanks, Steve, for coming on the live show today.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Bye, everyone.